series. Today, we're talking about overcoming resistance to new technology in the local authority workplace. So this webinar is our final webinar in our spring and summer series. We've managed just to squeak into summer. Autumn begins officially on Monday. I hope you've all had a really enjoyable summer. To recap, what are we doing with these seminars? Well, we've been running monthly seminars this year, alternating technical masterclasses using our software, mainly RootSmart, with Beth Webb, one of our consultants. So she runs a webinar. Many of you have probably sat in on, heard those webinars, joined those webinars yourselves. In the alternating month, I'm running a webinar which is on a broader topic of interest to our clients and other people who are joining us. So welcome to all of you. Thanks very much for joining. Just to say a few things about those few wider topics that we've been looking at this year. We started the year looking at the government's resources strategy with Victoria Murray from White Young Green. Then we looked at that issue of engaging the public in the recycling. How can you actually, what are the new ways? What are some new innovative ways of actually engaging people? That was with Hubbub, who have done a lot of that kind of work around the UK. Then we did a closer look at waste composition analysis with Sarah Knapp, one of our team, on the benefits and actually the technicalities of actually running a waste composition analysis project and why should you do it. More recently, we looked at the benefits and the challenges of connecting technology from the routing end of things through in-cab software to the back office, then to self-service, and that was something that we did with Colchester Borough Council, and Colchester Borough Council spoke at our on our last webinar. Today, our speaker may be known to some of you. Dr Suzie Hamlin spoke at our Northern Ireland User Day a few years ago on the topic of getting waste management services through local government reorganisation. For those of you who attended Birmingham, our 21st Century Cities Conference, she spoke there at that conference on realising the transformational potential of technology, which requires internal change. So today, we're really pleased to have Dr Suzie Hamlin with us and taking up a similar theme. So first, a little bit about Suzie. Suzie is interested in organisations. She's interested in large groups, small groups of people, when they work together and how they work together. And actually, most of all, she loves finding out how they work. And as she says, often as they don't work. Those of you who've heard Suzie speak before, then my kind of warning would be get prepared. This is probably not material you've ever heard before. I've known Suzie for a number of years and remember following her through 10 years of actually writing a lot of this material through a PhD. So technically this presentation has not just taken an evening to put together, it's actually taken 10 years to write, and then a number of years actually applying that in practice with a number of clients. She works as a consultant and has worked for many of the large IT companies, and worked in the health sector, in the public, private and the charity sector. If you'll bear with me, my best analogy for Suzie's work, when you listen to Suzie's work, it's that sensation, and this is particularly for those of our Scottish clients who are listening in, but it's when you're tasting a good whiskey, and you take that sip, and then you pause for a while, and then a moment later you get this experience at the back of your ears. It sort of comes back and gets you behind the ears. Well, hearing Suzie for me is a bit like that. The words she's saying and the presentation she's giving, but actually there's a whole load of meaning behind it. And actually, I would really encourage you to probably download the webinar and listen to it again later, because actually I can pretty much guarantee that what she's saying, there's a lot to be said, and actually you probably won't get it the first time. So I would say, listen again, please do, and a bit more information on how you can do that later. A final point just before Suzie speaks is we have a Q&A area here in the webinar. So please be thinking about some of your questions. You've probably got an awful lot of questions that will be raised through this presentation. If we don't get time, we'll address as many questions as we can within the time today. But if we don't get a chance to actually pick up your question and discuss it, then please do get in touch with us. We can ask Suzie whether she'll provide us with a response. We can then circulate that response with the link to her webinar. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Suzie Hamlin, who's going to be speaking today on this topic, overcoming resistance to new technology in the local authority workplace. Suzie, it's over to you. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm not quite sure what to say after such an introduction. So I'm going to be talking to you this morning about overcoming resistance to new technology in the local authority workplace. And the choice of that image, really, from a caterpillar to a butterfly, is really all about transformational potential that lies within that technology. Just to give you a little bit of background, I initially started my career in human resources, development and training, some PR, marketing, and then channel communications. And as the years went on, I realized I just was passionate about things that just don't work, but people act as if they do. And as the years have gone on, I've been increasingly captured by the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, and I'm sure that it is familiar to all of you. However, in case it's not, just to recap, a couple of men arrive in the palace offering to make some glorious clothes for the emperor ready for a parade he is doing through the streets. And they say to him, they will be beautiful, but it's only the wise that can see them. And as a result of that, there becomes a facade of the emperor and those working around him pretending that they could see the clothes. And then eventually he parades down the street naked, and everybody is saying, doesn't he look amazing? Doesn't he look great? Except for one little boy who shouts out, but he's naked. And for me, I feel like this happens in organizations a lot, that things are not really working, but we pretend that they are. We put our heads in the sand, and I'm interested in what it was about that little boy that gave him the confidence to call it out. Now, probably he was too naive to understand the political structure of the time, but how do we create that kind of culture in an organization where people at all levels will go, but it's just not working? Margaret Heffernan is a really interesting author, and she's done some fantastic TED Talks, one called the Forget the Pecking Order at Work, but she talks about willful blindness. Now, willful blindness was a legal term that originated in the 1800s, where a person seeks to avoid civil or criminal liability for a wrongful act by intentionally keeping himself or herself unaware of the facts that would render him or her liable. Now, the book that Margaret has read of that same title she says that the biggest threats and dangers we face are the ones we don't see, not because they're secret or invisible, but because we are willfully blind, that we just cover our eyes and we ignore the fact that they're not working. And there aren't little boys going, it's not working. So in terms of a little bit more of my background and why I became passionate about sorting out things that weren't working, I worked initially in O2, BT Cellnet, and the sickness and absenteeism process just hurt people. So what it meant, that people fearful, oh my goodness, I've been off sick, genuinely, now I'm going to get an initial warning, then I'm going to get a written warning, then I'm going to get a final warning. They just did not understand what the purpose of that was about. And I asked the organisation if I could possibly make it more humane, which ended up being a little cartoon booklet to explain to people the process and to take the mystery and the fear out of it. Then induction, as I went into development and training, we put a number of people in a room and told them a load of irrelevant things about BT. And I went around trying to find out where there were other ways that people were inducted in other organizations that really worked. And First Direct was just birthing, and they had an amazing induction program, which basically, when you came out of that day, you knew what the organization was about, how it was structured, and how all the different parts linked together. And we did a similar thing in BT Cellnet, saying, right now, from this point onwards, it's your opportunity to keep that connected thinking about your organization and the context within you're in, rather than just your job and your team. Then I went into channel comms and discovered that in BT Cellnet, we did not sell through any direct sales channels. We sold through the BT sales channels. We didn't employ them. They were employed by the wider BT organization, and there were 18 product lines vying for their attention. And we were only communicating with 150 people. And when I looked at contact details, only 50 of those details were correct. So we were sending our competitive information to Vodafone and Orange. And also, when I stood back, I recognized that there was actually 10,000 salespeople, from account directors, account managers, line of business managers, mobile specialists, data specialists, etc. And I said, please, 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 can I map that? And can we start a systemized way of enabling those sales channels? I moved from BT in the corporate world into a consultancy firm and was asked to take the same model of communication that made communication with a sales channel live and breathe. And one of the key things that happened is there was quite a divide between product development and sales. The product development saw sales that they would just sell something even if it wasn't ready, and sales thought that the product development was just really slow and didn't give them enough information. And it was all about, how do you look at that product launch process and integrate communications and education to a sales channel iteratively. Now, this model over time, I just saw sustainable change. I saw that actually sales did increase. I saw that there was engagement, and I just decided, for goodness sake, I've got to write it down. I really, really wanted to be a bridge between theory and practice, not an academic, although coming with a doctor at the front makes me sound like one. But really, I was just thinking, I want both to listen, theory and practice. So my question that I posed after 10 years of experiencing communication systems in large corporate organizations was, what principles, when applied to a large, complex organization or network, help with the flow of information and receptivity to and engagement with change? Now, what I discovered, and this took me 12 years, and my excuse is because I had 4 children, is that there were 18 themes that emerged, and they grouped into 7. Now, 2 of those themes I classified as essential, and an example of one of those was understanding the environment and engaging people. So understanding the roles, understanding what people do, understanding what they feel will benefit them, and drawing them in. And there were 5 that I would say were recommended. So, for example, ignored ineffectiveness. So no little boy saying it's not working. And also ignoring the effect of effectiveness, as in when there are amazing, beautiful pockets of good work where there might be a marketing product manager sitting by a product marketing manager sitting by a product manager who's doing incredible communications, but only in a small space. Look at what she's doing. Look what's working. I said he, whoever, look what's working, and actually replicate that and cause a ripple effect from the things that are working. And I found that those themes, 2 of them essential, 5 recommended, were fueled by or sitting on foundational beliefs and values without which they do not work. And those foundational values and beliefs were seeking first to listen and understand, not to impose and tell people what's going to happen, but seeking first to understand the language that people are using, the problems people are facing, helping to mediate and translate differences where there are very deep entrenched positions between departments, where they have their own folklore and stories that become truth, a boldness to challenge what is not working, the little boy, believing that many answers are found at the grassroots and the front line. That's where the pain often is. And not doing things for show and big bang, but doing things iteratively, bit by bit. And that's how engagement happens. Being constantly open to challenge and suggestion. So constantly open, say, okay, we're trying to change something that's not working. Right, let's iteratively change it. Is that working? Just constantly asking for feedback. Doing what you say you're going to do. Now, this seems like such an obvious thing, but in my organizational experience, you rarely find people that actually do it, but it is vitally important. A willingness to serve others' needs rather than to say, this is what I need. This is what I say we need to do is actually say, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Being ready to admit fault when appropriate and say sorry, being transparent, not operating from a place of fear, and boundary lines regarding what can and cannot be achieved and communicating that clearly. The conclusion that I came to at the end of all of that was high levels of participation, dialogue, checking of understanding, and the implementation of only those changes which have been identified as a need has the potential to increase levels of trust and receptivity to and engagement with change, resulting in both an increased sense of belonging and an increase in productivity. Now, it's really interesting because in my entire career, I've noticed that it's very, very easy to invest in external communications and engaging the public. But so often, all of us know that the internal engagement is absolutely key for success, but it is rarely invested in. So 12 years of reflecting on the politics of internal organizations to come up with that. And I think anyone could have come up with that statement without doing 12 years of research. So why on earth does it not happen? Now, Samuel Johnson said that people need to be reminded more often than they need to be instructed. We need to be reminded of the foundational truths that we always know. You need to say sorry. You need to forgive. You need to listen first before you speak. You need to understand and be in other people's shoes. But these things are very rarely done. And then months on, people will say, well, why is it not working? Because it's not been integrated well and dovetail into a real understanding of the organization. So the case against it, of course, is it takes time. So to actually listen to an organization, to understand the challenges on the front line, to think, how are we going to introduce this technology in a way that these guys will really see the benefit, takes so much time. However, the case for it is that you win hearts and minds. And although it might start slowly, it will gain momentum and develop a life of its own. So for me, it all boils down to the potential of connection and the potential pain of disconnection. So now when people say, what do? I don't talk about the PhD so much. That is the only thing I say, that everything that I do is about the potential of connection and the potential pain of disconnection. Everything is about relationship and understanding. Everything is about meeting people where they're at and taking them on a journey. And so what I do is I go under the skin of organizations and I look at where the barriers will be to technological receptivity, and seeing what processes are in place and what's really working and what can be brought into the new from the old, rather than plugging something in and hoping that people will be able to use it. Seeing organizations as living systems, so that what happens with a living system, with the neural system and the blood system, if you lose an arm, the head doesn't necessarily know it if it's disconnected. And that I know that irrespective of sector and irrespective of hierarchy or network, people, where they gather together, operate in a similar way. So how do you take people with you and enable them to competently challenge rather than achieving a mere working to rule? So the second story that I love is The Sun and the Wind. And again, many of you will know this, and I will just recap it. That there, the sun and the wind were watching a man down below walking along with his coat on, and they had a discussion regarding which one of them could get him to take it off. And the wind took its turn first and blew hard and hard, and the man wrapped his coat up and he blew harder and harder, and defiantly the man in his head will go, I need my coat, I will not take it off. And then the sun took their turn, and over time gently warmed the man, and he voluntarily took his coat off. So the difference there for me is there's a lot of organizational truths in that often it is easy out of expediency and time to implement a solution and basically say, this is the way it's going to be. But what will happen is people will defiantly say, okay, well, I'll do what you're asking me, but no more. And yet, if we gently take them on a journey over time, they will become volunteers that actually contribute to that process. So more recently, my work has been in NHS trusts and NHS digital, working around paperless 2020. I've been working in universities, Department for Education, Department for Work and Pensions, and most recently UK aid spending departments. And it's all been around the digitisation of government services to improve performance and improve service quality, knowing that increasingly with the digital public that everyone is expecting more. So some of the stories that I've got from working in there is that we've been trying to introduce a digital solution into the back of ambulances to allow paramedics to access summary care record in the ambulance and in the home. Now, what the ambulance drivers were doing were they were driving to a spot where it was out of coverage and then saying they couldn't use the system. Another one is the smart cards. We were looking at how smart cards work. These are the cards that your GP will use to put into their computer to access your medical record. They are very, very important pieces of plastic, and the permissions on them are very strict. And to break that, you break the Hippocratic Oath. But what we would find when we were in accident and emergency was these smart cards were breaking, getting stuck in machines. It was taking ages for them to get reordered, and there would be a card in a machine with a sticker on it going, "Don't take it out," with everybody accessing all the medical records they needed to operate in A&E. Now that is not good enough, but the technology is there, but they were using workarounds because they couldn't understand how to use it in the way that it was designed. So I've had experience of dispensing doctors as well, who basically have been offered a digital solution for prescriptions so that they can work more seamlessly with their pharmacist, but they have said, what we do is fine, thank you. Why should we change? But I would suggest it is going in one direction, and the potential is huge, that digitization, like people used to say that change is the only constant. We know that change is always going to happen. We know digitization is happening everywhere, and it has such incredible potential. So I've been saying to the organizations that are helping these large giants to digitize and said, send me in on the front end to build trust, to go under the skin, to understand the structures that are in place, the processes, the legacy systems, the concerns, the key players, the catalysts, the obstacles, and present back a picture no one can see in its entirety. To say what needs to be a focus, what has to change, what needs connecting to what, to encourage receptivity to the digitization that is absolutely going to happen. And what in this particular context, because every context is different, and every culture is different, and you will have a particular culture in waste management around your drivers, will take people on that very necessary journey to bring efficiency and the improvements that you want to see. So I would suggest that technical solution may potentially be the panacea for all kinds of organizational efficiencies and challenges, but without receptivity to it, and a willingness to change what really needs to be changed internally, from heart attitude to process, it will only result in workarounds and working to rule, if indeed it is even taken out of the box. For me, a lot of it can be to do with impression management versus appreciative inquiry. Now, I read a lot during my PhD, which really resonated with me after working in BT, that BT Mobile, BT Cellnet used to be the training ground for potential very senior managers in the rest of BT. And they would come in and they would be training really in our context, and they would more than often not raise to the ground and start from scratch and say, right, I know what we're going to do. I'm going to make this work. And they would use a massive ball like that and crack things down. And then within 2 years, they'd be gone. Now, if you could measure the hemorrhaging motivation and increasing cynicism of something like that, the figures, financial figures, would be huge. And that is versus appreciative inquiry. And this is when a leader comes into an organization and seeks first to listen. that sits down on the front line and listens to the challenges in the vehicles, that actually looks at what I say, it's the rebuilder of broken walls, that actually the walls are still there and some bits are still really intact and they're really working, and you find and discover those and you build upon that, not razing to the ground or starting from scratch. And for me, what happens with that, and I love this image, is that in those incredible walls, you build your own unique pieces that add and build upon the beautiful things that are already happening, and your mark is there and it will never be forgotten. But instead of raising from the ground, you've got sustainable change going on. People talk a lot about the front line and the grassroots, and there is such a power of having been there and not losing touch. Now, I think in the environment that you are in, that many of those in senior management have actually been there, and it's so important not to lose touch. What it's like to be a driver, what it's like to collect the waste, what it's like to be on those routes, what it's like interacting with the public. But if you haven't been there, the importance of the humility to learn from those who really are or have been, giving time to really listen, seeking the wisdom, insights and skills of the team and beyond, and not making assumptions. And it's really simple and it's really common sense. But if you listen to someone and then in some of your publications you say, I was listening here and this was one of the issues, when those people see that their issues are being raised and they've been listened to, that changes heart attitude. So I would suggest is really important about minding the gap. For me, there is a massive gap often between departments in organizations and a chasm between. So for me, in universities, the stories that marketing tell about academics and the stories that academics tell about marketing is unbelievable. Neither true, but true to them, and they have an entrenched position, and that needs to change to enable universities to market themselves well and bridge that gap. My latest one is I was in a PIP assessment on Monday, and the difference in what PIP assessors think that GPs will do and what GPs think they need to do is absolutely broken. And the person that suffers in that is the claimant. So for you, I'm thinking, what are the stories that the back office are talking about and the drivers? And are there differences in opinion that actually could be bridged to enable the technology to work well? Rather than talking about them up there, talking about working together. So I often think about bridges, and my belief is that relationships are like bridges. So the stronger the relationship, the stronger the trust that develops, the weightier the message that can be carried over that bridge. Now, sorry, this isn't a brilliant image, but I love what it says. So you've got a bridge like that. You cannot put a heavy, this is the technology we're introducing, message over it unless you've got relationship and trust and it's iteratively introduced. So for me, relationship and trust plus challenge equals receptivity and stronger relationship. It's only going one way. And what I found in BT is we made loads of mistakes. So when we researched those 10,000 salespeople and tried to segment them and try and work out what kind of information an account director needed, what an account manager needed, they'd heard nothing from us for years and suddenly they were inundated. But we went back to them really quickly and they said, too much, and we slowed it down within 2 weeks and they thanked us. So they weren't critical of us for making the mistake. They were just grateful that we were listening and that we were receptive and agile enough to make the change. So what has been a key factor for me? In every organization, I would suggest there are some people that really shine in terms of their ability to build relationship and trust and make things happen. They may be in any role in that organization. It's not about seniority. It's about a gift of building trust, knowing how to manage relationships. And I often talk to people and say, list those people. Who are the people you always copy in? Who are the people that get things done? Who are the people that get things off the ground? And what often happens in organizations is we nominate champions, and it is an ill-fitting role. We go, oh, there are champions to roll this out, and yet that person, for them, is just another thing to add to their job list, and actually they have no passion about it, and they're not a champion. It's once you put an onerous thing on somebody. But if you found those people, for me, it's the potential of connecting the connectors to get change to happen, to identify those people from all levels that are actually really good. They instinctively know how to connect whom with whom and what with what. They somehow survey the organizational horizon and just know who may catalyze what you're doing, who may block, how to develop and build relationships, how to challenge things wisely, astutely, and humbly. And they often get invited and CC'd in. Now, I don't know, as you're listening to this, whether you've got names of people in your head, but I just know so many, and I'd love to bring them in a room one time and just say, what is it that makes you do that? Finally, I would suggest that it is really important to harness the grapevine. So gossip, as some people call it. Do you see it as a rife and negative force? Because that is how it's perceived. But it's really interesting that actually rumours in the grapevine are reported by employees to be a major source of information about their company. It adds to and partly replaces official communication, gives flesh to the bones, and has an extremely important task as a creator and maintainer of human relations. Now, we all know that that can work in a very negative way. And when I've mentioned those entrenched positions previously, that is exactly what's happening there in a negative way. They are stories that are not true, because relationships and bridges are not built between those teams, and the truth is not out there. Uncertainty reduction theory is the vital importance of reducing uncertainty in any communicative transaction. So research has been done to say that when the grapevine is working and it's insufficient and part information that is being passed over it, most people will complete it in a negative way. So if they know half the story, the other half of the story will be negative against them. So for me, I don't know if it's true, but there is a theory out there that those doing the assessment centres in DWP are actually targeted to get people off DLA and say no to PIP. Is that true? I don't know, but I would suggest they should have a campaign to communicate that. So as uncertainty increases, as technology is introduced, information needs are heightened. And there is a real link between reducing uncertainty and increasing trust. So there is ways in which you can harness the grapevine. So the astute manager learns to deal with the grapevine successfully and to take advantage of the positive elements by eliminating inaccuracies, using all the communications media they can to be as clear and open as possible, eliminating secrecy, so not allowing those secrets to just continue. And it's interesting because those same people, those connectors, those relational guys will know those stories. So they are quite key in how you can eliminate some of that secrecy. And what about the places where the drivers meet? I don't know if it's in cafes, whether they have rooms that they gather together where they tell their stories. So what do you use those places for? What imagery could you put up? Imagery is so powerful, and it doesn't have to be serious. You know, use those places to eliminate inaccuracies and to deal with some of the gossip that's going around. So the grapevine is the main source of organizational information. It exists in every organization and it moves quickly. It is 75 to 95% accurate, but 25% of that can be filled with negativity, and that can change somebody's attitude towards whether they will take something on board or not. It answers all unanswered questions, either correctly or incorrectly, but you can be sure that it will answer them. And inaccuracies of 5 to 25% may have serious consequences, as they are usually bad news. So you can examine these characteristics and take advantage of them in the places where people gather, in the places where they will actually read and start to change their opinion. So in the form of a little recap, I talked about the importance of appreciative inquiry, the importance of those in senior positions who are perhaps coming in new or about to try and introduce new technology, to really listen deeply to what the stories are that will stand in the way of technology being introduced. The importance not to lose touch for those who've been on the front line, who've driven those trucks, who've worked in the back office, or to go and meet with them and listen and ensure that in the communications that ensue that voice is heard and reflected back. That it's really important to mind the gap between what perhaps the drivers are saying, what the back office are saying, what senior management might be saying, what the fears are about technology, the fear of loss of jobs. And also that relationships are like bridges. So if messages of transformation and excited potential of what this technology can do are communicated over distrust and weak relationship, people will just come out with fear. And yet there is a way to take people with you. And some part of that is to do with people in the organization who really get it, who really are a buzz of activity and relationship building, who are not frightened of the technology, who have the ears of the drivers, those people who really can help to oil the process. And finally, the importance of recognizing that the grapevine exists. It can cause those entrenched positions, but also it can be used to eliminate inaccuracies and take people on that journey. Thank you very much.
Suzie, thank you very much. That was really interesting, and yeah, an awful lot there to take in and think about and ponder. And yeah, so I've got a couple of questions, but I just want to encourage those of you who are listening, if you've got a question, just to use the question and answer section here and type those questions in there. I can actually then enable those questions if you type them in. While people are thinking about those questions, Suzie, and there's probably people are probably shell shocked sitting back and thinking through some of that stuff, because that's it's a very holistic position that you've taken and thought through some of these issues that actually, you know, I recognize from working in local authority in a very large organization, and we recognize working with our clients who we find that are maybe in a similar situation where you know, the technology works fine, but somehow you just can't get this technology embedded into the authority, into the culture. I've got a couple of questions. My first one I wanted to ask was a lot. You talked a lot about culture, and what I understood from what you were saying was that you suggest that new technology can be introduced more easily in a culture that has a healthy set of values. Now, and you mentioned things like trust, and you mentioned, you know, not doing things for show. You mentioned transparency and being ready to admit faults. All things that you mentioned there that we all kind of know are a healthy environment, the sort of healthy family environment that we all would like to live in, etc. But I mean, I'm aware of the fact and that it's possible to feel like a cog in a machine within a culture that's not particularly healthy. And so I suppose my question is for people who are listening who may feel that they're in an organization where that they may not have that kind of enlightened view of how a culture ought to operate with those values. Can you start small and work outwards? And that's part of my question. And my other sort of part of that question is someone who many years ago, who was a South Yorkshire miner, said to me, "Stuart, you can't change upwards. You can only change downwards. You know, in the kind of hierarchical view of things, you can't have any impact on what happens above you. You can only change those things that are those people who are kind of below you in the hierarchy." So that's my question to you, really. And I know I've said it's kind of a complex one, but can you start small and work outwards? And also, even though you can do something about maybe changing the culture of people who work for you, can you do anything about changing the culture back upwards?
Thanks for that, Stuart. Is that 2 questions?
I think it was. I craftily sneaked
Okay.
in 2.
Yes, I think is the answer to that. And it does take time. What I'm thinking is, I don't believe that's right, that you can only change downwards. I think going back to that slide, like you said, we all know. Samuel Johnson says we often just need reminding. Now, people don't just want to be told that, and they go, yeah, we know, but we can't do it. That I think if you do believe that that change can happen locally where you are, that you start to make it happen and you start to report on the effect of that upwards. So I think when in BT Cellnet with those our incorrect communications, nobody really wanted to change. I know it's a very different environment, but after a while, bit by bit, we began to understand those structures more and start to report that upwards and say, oh, we've had a good news story here. This has really changed this. We've heard this. And I know that senior management, they don't want problems. They want answers and solutions. So I think, yes, I think everything needs to start small and iterative and go from there. And that's what helps with sustainability. But actually, it's about how do you communicate upwards? How do you say, listen, I'm thinking of wanting to try and do this. Do you mind if I do that? And can I report back to you what change that's happening? And that you're consistent. It's all about consistent, iterative communication and believing you can change upwards, because there's very few people that would say, actually, you're right, we're brilliant at introducing new technology and it always works. We really don't need to change at all. Does that answer your question?
It's a very good answer. Yeah, it's about having a go, isn't it? And actually,
I think so, yes.
And starting to have that culture of kind of honesty, I suppose, with your management upwards to say, look, this is what I want to do. This is really a change we want to see. And we know that meeting many of you, many of you are doing that and have a really open relationship with both people who work with you and management. No one yet has dared to ask a question, Suzie, so I'm going to ask my second one, which is just, if you could, just going back to unwrapping a little bit about what you were saying about the grapevine. And I think we're all probably very familiar with the grapevine. We all know that actually it is probably the most honest place that there is in the workplace. People actually venting what they feel about things actually in a very, very honest way. And often that comes out in a critical direction. So you mentioned about possibly using images in the places where people meet. I just wonder if there's anything you've thought about that, actually how you could get involved in turning around the grapevine, sort of that negative culture, in a way that, I suppose my understanding of the grapevine is they can spot a management plant a mile off. If you know what I'm saying, you can spot someone who's sort of towing the corporate line or whatever, if that's seen to be a kind of a bit of an empty corporate approach. So how do you really start to sort of try and turn things around if you're wanting to see change in the area that you work in? Are there any other thoughts you have on how you could actually get involved and I don't know the answer. I know some of you who are listening in have had a kind of open door policy on new technology, and you've had open door to anyone who wants to come in and talk about their worries or whatever. But you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's really important to listen, and what I mean by that is it's one thing to have an open door policy and people don't come, perhaps because they're becoming as individuals, and actually the grapevine breeds on group stories, and actually to genuinely gather people in a place or go to where they are and to listen to them without an agenda, without a purpose of being there apart from to listen and then to reflect back what's been heard and leave it at that initially. and then to iteratively move that and shift that position. So I know I talked about external communications, that so often such investment is put on with engaging the public, managing PR. You know, how do, oh my goodness, this story is breaking, how do we manage that? It's a similar thing. It's almost like there needs to be somebody watching over that as a communications expert who's facilitating that and drawing together groups and bringing people in a room. And once you've listened once to a group of people whilst they have their coffee or at a convenient time, you know, with their buy-in, that story will spread. So it's those positive experiences where you're just listening, you know, where they can't go, oh, they've got their corporate head on. It's about engaging them in discussion where they'll be really honest.
That's good. Thank you. I like that. I think one of the most the things that hit me from what you were saying there was actually the fact that organizations spend so much money and resource on external communications, but actually next to nothing on communicating internally. I think, you know, there's a kind of lesson there, isn't there?
Yeah.
In how you resource change, and particularly how we introduce new technology. It's not just about buying the technology and going through the training. It's actually about spending time communicating with employees and the team as to what this is going to be like, what it's going to feel like, how it's going to impact on you and your role in the organization.
And I think that often, you know, you may have the story about why you're introducing it to improve performance and to improve customer service. But actually, if you really connect with the troubles and the challenges they face and then connect that with how this is going to benefit, it's about them seeing the benefit and buying in.
Can I ask you another question? Are there some people you think are almost impossible to change or almost resistant? Have you ever come across people who you think this person will never ever change, and you know, no matter what you do? And do you kind of think that no, there's always a way to actually bring about some change in however resistant people are?
I think some people will refuse to change. And I think some people will move on, but I think that they are in the very small minority, and that actually when their colleagues next to them who they really respect start to buy in, it really does have an effect. And I think that anyone, however strong and vehemently they have a reason why they're not going to do it, when they hear that story told and people trying to consider a solution, and something shifts in their heads and their heart.
Suzie, thank you very much. We have really enjoyed that. I've enjoyed that. I hope those of you who joined us this morning and those of you who are listening subsequently will have enjoyed as much as I have in listening to Dr. Suzie Hamlin this morning. Really enjoyable. To get more information on Suzie's work, please do get in touch with us and Suzie. We'll circulate Suzie's contact details with the information from this webinar. We will be circulating to all of you the link to actually download the presentation, where you can listen to that again. Just to say that this presentation and all our other spring and summer webinars are available from our website. So if you wanted to go to www.ukisl.com and then just search Summer Webinar Series, and then you can download including this one we've just heard this morning. Give us a couple of days to actually get that sorted out, but it will be on there very shortly. A little bit about the program for autumn and winter. Autumn starts on Monday. We will be back in October with our first of our autumn and winter programs, but more on that to follow. We'll send that out and circulate those topics. If any of you do have any topics, waiting to hear any topics that you actually would like to suggest for us to cover, either in the Route Smart technical masterclasses or in the wider topics that I've been running this year, please do get in touch. We have got a program, but you know, if there are a few of you who actually would really like us to change that and look at something else in particular, we're very flexible and would like to do that. Thank you again to Suzie for a presentation, really enjoyable. Thank you for joining us again on our webinar. So from me, it's bye for now. Thank you. Bye-bye.